Very well, thank you. It's been a while, and your colleague will be here too today.
GB, I'm going to text him in a minute. I'm not sure if he's here. I'm always
Uh-huh.
joining. I just don't show my video, so I will tell you.
It's good to see your face today, though.
Yeah, cheers.
So welcome everybody to the actual book club, so to say. And I'm still hopeful that at one point or the other we would still have a face-to-face session. So our virtual book club is this business and leadership book club is focused on reviewing text and content on business and leadership. For us here, the sole intent of coming together is the binding force of love for reading and passion for continuous learning. For us, every book we read, plan, our commitment is to apply it in our profession, measure results, even share practical examples of our individual experience of certain topics or theories uh, or even case studies. Uh, at every point in time, what we do is to saddle everyone with responsibility for leading conversation and helping to call out key points on learning of each book we're reviewing per time. For today, Daria Kiyera will be leading conversation. And Titilayo Daniel is the moderator, but somehow I guess she's trying to connect. So I'm just starting us off so that we can get into the book. We know already that it's quite an interesting book. I have read the book, and I'm sure some of us also have read. I've not finished reading the book though, but the beauty of being in a book club is that even after this book review, we also, get inspiration to further go into the book and draw on lessons as we find fit for our individual journey. So welcome to everybody from every part of the world. I know we have people from Europe here on the call, people from Asia, we have people from America here. So, and Africa also is not left out. So welcome again, whatever part of the world you're calling from, so I can actually say good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Good to have you all on this book review. Daria, I will let you, do the honors of introducing, just tell us a bit about yourself, then you can delve into the book. And the rule of the house usually is feel free to type in the chat box, and I'm sure the lead conversationist will also be asking questions at one point or the other. Please participate, engage. Let's make this as interactive as possible. I know I can only count on you anyway. So let's go. Over to you, Dari Akiera. And thanks for leading too.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Esther, for introducing us into today's session. And thank you, everybody, for taking out time to join. I don't know if I'm audible enough.
Yes, you are, Dari. Go ahead.
Oh, okay,
yes,
thank you very much. Thank you very much. So thank you again for taking out time to join our book review session. I would promise you that it's going to be a very, very lively and interactive and also a stimulating session, because the book we are about to review it's a very, very wonderful and educative book. And by the end of this session, you agree with me that it was will be part of this book. Sorry I didn't prepare a slide to introduce myself. I wasn't expecting that, but I'll try and keep it as brief as possible. So like Okay, so like Esther said, my name is Dari Oluwadari Akinyera. My friends call me Dari, and I'm a medical marketing manager for Friesland Campina, a marketing professional in general, and I have about 5 years of marketing experience. And also, I'm an affiliate of the Chartered Institute of Marketing, UK. So, and also, I don't know, there's some distractions. I don't
Pardon
know if
me,
we
before
can
you go
kindly mute.
further, Jerry, I'm going to please just a moment so we can reduce distraction. I think Ella, you're a co-host. Please go ahead and do the input for people who are joining, and I can hear some background noise. So please kindly mute yourself so that we can hear lead facilitator. Another we can, of course, go ahead and unmute yourself. So pardon that, Gary. Every viewer also on Facebook. So go ahead, please.
Okay. All right. So like I was introducing myself, like I said earlier. Hearing some. All right. So like I said earlier, that my name is Daria Akinyera and I'm medical marketing manager, Friesland Campina. I've worked previously in the pharmaceutical sector, also that's specializing also in medical marketing, and it's part of a core part of my specialty. But also, I have also a preference for also business management, channel management, and brand management also. So it's all encompassing. So I've also had about over 6 years of marketing, and like I always tell myself that every day I learn, and there's so much to learn every day, and that's one of the, I'm sure, one of the fundamental pillars of the Business and Leadership Book Club. Also to continue to learn and improve ourselves in all areas of our careers and also personal life. That's why I would just share my screen. I don't know if Esther, am I permitted to share my screen?
Please go ahead. I already gave you co-host, so please go
All
ahead.
right, all right.
Mama, tikoni. Mama, tikoni.
Okay, please let me know if you can see my slides.
Yes, it can be seen.
Yes, we
Okay.
can.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. So today's session will be looking at the book review of Storytelling with Data, a data visualization guide for business professionals by Nussbaumer, Knaflic. So I would say that this book is one of the most, let's say, revealing and soul-searching books I've read in recent times. The first time I saw this book, I was like, data. This book will be talking about variance, standard deviation, calculations, and I was like, But I just said, let me pick it up, and I was amazed by the level of simplicity and accessibility this book has, because the author took her time to be as simple as possible and also made sure that the book was very, very easy to understand by all types of individuals across all spheres of whether you're whether you're not even business oriented, whether you are just someone that's not even interested in data. It's so simple to understand, so simple and straight to the point. And that's what I really, really love about this book. I'll appeal to you, if you haven't read this book, please take your time to go into it in detail. But you still also learn a lot from this session, from this book review session. So about the author, Cole Nussbaumer Knaflic, sorry, her name is quite tongue twisting. Tells the story about data. She has always stated that she loved telling stories about data. And if you go to her blog is storytellingwithdata.com. She's the CEO and founder of that blog, and also the author of this book, that is Storytelling with Data, a data visualization guide for business professionals. She's also the voice behind the SWD podcast. That's the Storytelling with Data podcast. And she is also well known and well regarded internationally because of her simplicity and always being data-minded and data-driven. Cole has a unique talent that was honed over the past decade through analytical roles in banking, private equity, and her most recent job was working as Google. You know how Google pay attention to analytics and how they are being how they pay attention to data and their data-driven approach. So it was while she was at Google, she found she was able to have this special funding or special desire for telling stories with data in most simple forms. She also discovered that most people were always telling data in the wrong way. They were always more concerned about the explanatory part of the exploratory part of data and not telling the story behind it. So she had that drive to help people see how she can easily help people to tell stories with data. So this is how the book is organized. It is organized into 10 chapters, and each chapter gives us a very, very beautiful background or a different aspect to how you can interpret data and tell stories behind data. For each paragraph you read, you get different insight, a different perspective onto how you can interpret data, how you can construct data, how you can construct graphs, how you can construct bars, different insight that you had never ever known. While I was reading this book, I was just picturing all scenarios when I was in business meetings and you're looking at a slide and you're like, wow, what's happening here? So this book tells us about those scenarios and why stuffs like that happen. So this is how it's organized. And she also, in the first part of the introduction, highlighted 6 lessons that she wants everyone to learn. She states that most people are not good at telling stories, especially even here in Nigeria. Most people are not usually that good in telling stories. So it's all even much more difficult to now tell stories with data. So this book was designed for anyone who needs to communicate something using data. This includes, but is not limited to, several people in the business sphere, analysts, business managers, executives, but not confined to people in the business sphere also. She also made this book for also students that are still learning how to interpret data during the course of their education, students who are working with theses, who also have to analyze and do a lot of data insights their research, And also, so the book was written for it cut across all classes of individuals, and that is why she made it so simple. And this book review I'll also try to follow that same path by being concise and simple as possible. So, like I said, that she highlighted 6 lessons that she wants to use to help people understand how to tell stories with data. So the first part is to understand the context. We'll talk about that in detail. The second lesson is to choose an appropriate visual display. Third is to eliminate clutter. Fourth is to focus our attention where we want it to be. Think like a designer and tell a story. So I think she saved the best for the last. How to tell an effective and stimulating story. So if you look at this graph, most of us will see that this graph is something we usually see in our business meetings, our cycle meetings. You open, someone clicks the slides. The first slide you see is a plethora of graphs and like a box of so many wordings, and your eyes are scanning through. You don't even know what to pick, what to deduce from the presentation. And the speaker also too is saying so many things. So they're trying to balance what is on the slide and what the speaker is saying. So Cole highlights, and I think she did a very good job here, trying to do story. I think I'm mute her mic. Thank you. So Cole did a good job by trying to highlight at the introduction of this book that we usually make the mistakes of having bad graphs or bad charts, and that's why I've labeled it. She called them ineffective graphs. These graphs or these charts do not tell any story, do not stimulate the audience, does not create any communication. The audience cannot take anything from these graphs. So she had already created a precedent that she was going to see how we can effectively reach our audience and tell stories with data. So the first lesson is to understand the context. First lesson she highlighted here is to understand the context. So when we talk about context, when we are trying to interpret data, everybody has different aim, different objective when you're giving a presentation or when you present a data. So for us to have or present, to communicate effectively with our audience, we need to understand why we are presenting that data and the story behind the data. So she highlights that to be successful in data visualization, you need to spend time in understanding the context of why you are presenting or why you do. Before you begin down the path of a data visualization or communication, you need to pay attention and understand context. You need to communicate. So in this chapter, Cole focused on understanding the important components of context. And she discussed some key strategies to help people to be successful in communicating visual data. She also highlighted that most people spend too much time in exploratory analysis. Someone trying to say something. Okay, so she said that most people try and spend so much time on exploratory analysis. Exploratory analysis simply means spending too much time on how you achieved the graph or the bar chart that or any visual that you are painting, how you achieved it. But is that for you to effectively tell stories with data, you should spend time on explanatory. That's telling stories. And after taking time, it can be tempting to show your audience everything that you've done as evidence of the work you did. Okay, I was able to plot this graph this way. So when I plotted this graph this way, I did this, I did that. No, you shouldn't spend time on explanatory analysis. we should, exploratory analysis. We should spend time on explanatory analysis, concentrating on the importance of the data. Why do I have this data? What is my audience trying to deduce from this data? What message am I trying to pass across? What communication am I trying to pass across with this data? So we shouldn't spend time on how we got the data, but what the data is saying. So she also highlighted also that before we can successfully visualize data, we need to be very, very efficient in 3 areas. We should know who our audience are. Who are we trying to reach? What class of audience are we talking to? She also talked about the what, usually called as adverb of manner. What information or what is the need your audience wants? And how is the adverb of manner, what is what your audience needs? What are the needs of your audience? So taking into consideration these 3 areas will help you to be successful in visualizing data. So she highlights here that you should try and consult for context. That you may need to ask more questions from either if it's a meeting you're having with some clients, you should ask for more information. If you look at the right-hand side of the slide, you see there are so many questions that she highlighted. So she highlighted that there are times that you need to ask more questions in order to be able to channel your presentation in an effective way. You need to eliminate any assumptions. You should not assume, like a very, very important person I know usually is the assumption is the lowest form of knowledge. So she says eliminate any type of assumptions. You need to ask all the questions in order to your day in right way. Very important in structuring your communication. So she also highlights that to follow up much more information. Because sometimes the answer, you need to follow up the question. So she highlights that it's very important to get the context. If you don't get the context of why you are presenting, what your audience needs, then you may not effectively across the right communication or the right balance. So she highlighted some strategies that can help to convey information, story we want to tell to our audience. And she highlighted these 3 strategies. That these 3 strategies or these 3 ways are to simple. So imagine that you are going for a cycle meeting, and while you're in the cycle meeting, maybe you are the last person to present, and the other speakers or the other presenters they've used a lot of time, and your presentation was supposed to be for 10 minutes or 15 minutes, and the other speakers had spent up your time. So, oh, please, you have just 3 minutes, come and present. I'm sure most of us are familiar with this scenario. And they tell you, okay, you have 3 minutes, come and present. So how will you tell your story in 3 minutes? Sometimes you fall into the trap of going overboard. We still want to follow the way we had planned our presentation for 10 minutes when we have only 3 minutes left. So that's why she emphasized that for us to convey our idea, we should utilize three strategies. That's the 3-minute story. Before you present any data or before you communicate with your audience, you should have your objective should be stated, should be crafted as a 3-minute story. Something that you can say within 3 minutes and it will hit the objective and the call to action for that particular message. She also talks about the big idea. The big idea is much more shorter than the 3-minute story. It's just a single sentence. But that big idea, that single sentence should contain your main point, what's at stake, and your call to action. Then she also highlights storyboarding. Storyboarding simply means using visual aids like sticker notes or post-it papers to highlight your communication material. Visualize the outline of the information you want to share. Maybe just maybe three stick stick pad notes or 4 or 5, depending on what you want to communicate. But she emphasizes that you should articulate your point, make it concise and succinct, so that it will be easy to just, when you're caught unawares, when you're caught at that 3 minutes, you have 3 minutes to make your presentation. You can pass straight, concise, and your audience gets the meaning of what you are saying. So the second lesson she tried to capture in the subsequent chapter was to choose an appropriate visual. This chapter, I think this chapter was the core of this book, because she meant that there are several different types of visual displays. And we as business professionals, whether in the business fair, or whether we're students, or whether we're entrepreneurs, we make use of visual displays. We make use of graphs, we make use of charts. But she highlighted that in her career spanning over so many years, that she has noticed that there are particular sets of visual display that are very, very effective in telling stories, very effective in telling stories with data. She highlighted them here. So these are the 12 important, or the 12 basic visual styles you can use when you're trying to tell stories with data. So she talked about simple text, she talked about tables, heat map, vertical bars, lines, slope graphs. If you look at this graph, slide, you see that there may be some visual styles you use in your workplace, in business meetings, and your cycle meetings. But in the course of this, part of this lesson, you will see how we are able to use these visual styles in a different way to effectively tell stories, to communicate with your audience, to reduce the mental strain on your audience from seeing all those slides with so many graphs that are not telling any story. So I will start with, I tried to analyze everything. I was tempted not to just pick out some, because I know most of us use most of these styles. So it's important that we know how to use them. So I was able to outline the key information or the key strategies she highlighted for us, for us to effectively use these visual styles. So we'll start with the simple text. When I was reading this book, I was thinking simple text is visual style. I've not seen it in Excel, I've not seen it in PowerPoint. I was like, wow, simple text. I don't think in my career I've ever seen any business presentation or any psycho meeting presentation that you just see a simple text talking about analysis of data. Either you see graphs, line graphs, or bar charts. But she said that a simple text is one of the most effective ways to pass across an information simply. But she also highlighted that for you to utilize a simple text, that you must use it when you have just 1 or 2 figures to share. So if you have 1 or 2 figures to share, it may not be effective for you to use either a bar chart or a graph or any of the conventional visual styles. And you can cut your message, you can give your message to the audience effectively just using a simple text. The characteristics of using a simple text is that you should make the numbers prominent. You should use few words as possible. Later in our discourse, we'll see why it's important for us to use few words as possible. Then she also emphasized that you should remember the context. Like we said earlier, context is very important. If your audience is thinking about how we want to increase the price of a certain product over the next year, and you are telling, and your slide is telling the audience how competition is doing better, you are getting it wrong in terms of context. So you should need to understand the context. And if your data or if your numbers are more or your figures are more than 2, she advised that you should make use of a graph or a table. We will also talk about that later on. So let's see an example. Let's see how she effectively used a simple text. I'd like you to look at this figure. What do you see from this figure? You know, anybody can make a comment. What do you see from this figure, from this graph? How can you interpret it?
So
Somebody wants to try.
Well, in 1970.
Where's everyone?
Good evening, everyone.
Okay, Kunle Adelakun, thank you. Go on, please.
Okay.
So I think what the graph is saying is in 1970 there are a lot of traditional stay-at-home moms. The rate is higher, it's about 41 of them, or 31%. In 2012, it came down. So that's what I can deduce from the data.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you. But I'd like to ask you a question. I want you to be frank as possible. Was this was it easy for you to interpret this graph?
Well, it's easy for me to interpret it because there are informations like the would I call it the topic now, and then I look at the year, and then maybe the percentage as well. So I think with the data and then the details on the data, it's not so hard to interpret.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you very much. Well, I would like to ask you a last question. Do you think that there are too many wordings or too many sentences in this graph?
Yeah, it's too wordy. Actually, they can make it better. That would tell the proper story.
Can make it better. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for your frank.
Can I say something?
So.
And someone else.
Okay. Yes. Please go on.
Okay. That's
Author.
That's you or someone else.
Hello.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
Okay. From my opinion, can you hear me, please?
Yes, you can hear you clearly.
From my opinion, from what I'm looking at, 3 things stood out straight from what I could pick. The heading, the graph, and then the last part, which is the bolded field center. So at least the document is easy to interpret easily with those 3 things that point out from the document itself: the heading, the chat, and the last part that was bolded. So it's simple and it can be easily interpreted. Then taking out maybe the other letterings that are very difficult to see from far, but the chart is more visible with the heading. So I think it's easier to speak and to interpret this kind of document if one wants to speak.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for your thoughts. I don't know if there's anybody else that wants to.
Yes, Dari. Sorry, Dari. Good evening, everyone.
Yeah. Good evening, Peter. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I was going to say the data at a glance is first and foremost crowded. There's many letterings on it that makes it, to some extent, takes away the essence of the whole graph, of the whole visualization in the first place. But then with normal use, you just know, okay, there was a sharp decline of children with traditional stay-at-home mothers from 1970 to 2012. But that's you helping the presenter to edit his data. Observation.
Yeah, thank you very much. I really appreciate everybody's thoughts and comments. So if you look at that graph, you see that the graph is just okay. Yes, no problem. Yeah, it's yes, definitely, please.
No more. because we can't actually allow everybody to speak. So now let's take Chill Profile. I see your hand going to first. Then Lois or Louis. I hope I sounded well. Just in that order. Go ahead. Louis.
Okay, thanks. So for me, I think the graphs does not tell any story. You needed to read the letterings, the what is the sense of the graph. So I think it's a simple information, but very complex to the page. That's one of.
Thank you very much. Okay. Is there anyone that wants to?
Louis and
Is there anyone else that still wants to say something?
who spoke just now? Was that Louis? Or Cheryl?
Yeah, that was Louis. Yeah, that was Louis that spoke.
Okay, and then Cheryl, Frank, and Will. Maybe you can go on and.
All right. I thank you so much, everyone, for your thoughts. It's very, very valid. So I like what Louis said, that it's kind of overcomplicated. Like Cole said, that if you have figures, just one or two figures, and you can utilize a simple text. You don't necessarily need to use a graph if you have just one or two figures to compare. Imagine you are in a cycle meeting and you are like, maybe you've not had lunch and someone is presenting something like this so wordy, you can't even see what it's talking about. The graph is just simply talking about the percentage of children with a married stay-at-home mother with a working husband, just comparing the percentage between 1970 and 2012. This graph can just be transformed into a simple text that can pass the desired information to the audience. Now let's see this. Will you agree with me that this is much more simpler? 20% of children had a traditional stay-at-home mom in 2012 compared to 41% in 1970. Very simple, passes the message across. But we also need to remember context, like we said in the fourth point. If the presenter was trying to pass across the percentage of children in 2012, the presenter would highlight 20%. Or if the person wanted to talk about maybe 1970, 41%, you just highlight 41%. So we see it's very simple. If you put this in front of me when I'm hungry, I understand it easily because I don't need to stress myself. So that's what Cole says that. So that's what Cole is trying to highlight, that when you just have one or two figures to share, you don't overcomplicate matters. Just utilize a simple text. But just remember the characteristics. Make the numbers that you want to pass across prominent. Use few supporting words. Always remember the context. What do you want your audience to know about this graph? But if it involves more than two figures, you can then use a graph or a table. So that's where we come into tables. So I'm sure as business professionals, we are used to tables. We see tables, sales figures. So many times we use tables. So Cole also alluded to this, that tables are very, very important for comparing values. Yeah, they interact with our verbal. Okay? So they interact with our verbal system, which means that we usually read tables. And one thing we need to keep in mind with the table is that you want the design to fade into the background. You don't want the background of the table to be taking the space of the data that your audience needs to know about or needs to analyze. So we should not let heavy borders or shading compete for the attention of the data within the table. We should make it stand out. should avoid using heavy borders. So let's see an example. What do we see in this table? What's wrong with this table? I don't know if anyone wants to comment briefly.
Borders
Hello,
are very heavy.
I was
Heavy
going to
but
say,
I think,
I was going to say it's cluttered. It's too cluttered.
okay. All right, thank you very much, Peter. I think Otto wanted to say something.
yes, about the borders. The borders are heavy or very thick. Yeah. Both the outside and inside borders.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Otto. So, like Peter said, it's kind of crowded, and Otto also alluded that the borders are thick. So, because the borders are too thick, the figures look crowded. They look jam-packed. So, to a person's eye, you really can't deduce what the table is saying, or you can't even compare values from the table. So, let's see how Cole says a table should look like. So this is how a table should look like. You see that when it came, there was like a relief on your eyes because that heavy border, that thick border has left, and you see it's much more comfortable to look at because it's lighter. The numbers, data stand out better, and it's easier for you to compare the figures and analyze the figures. So if we want to effectively tell a story with a table, we should not make use of heavy borders. Heavy borders does not do any justice in helping to compare data, and it doesn't make your data stand out. So we should minimize using heavy borders, and also, if possible, take away the borders completely so that the data can stand out. So we'll look at heat map. So heat map is also kind of similar to a data. It's kind of similar to a table, sorry. But what makes the heat map similar to a table is because it contains so many numbers. There's so many figures, so many numbers in it. So it's kind of difficult to pick out numbers that you can compare or analyze. So Cole emphasizes that when you are using a heat map, make use of visual cues, make use of colors, colored cells that convey relative magnitude. And this is because it helps to reduce mental stress, mental load on your audience. Let's look at this table. Let's look at this table. If we're in a presentation room and in this table, the presenter is talking about, wow, category 8, we have done 58% of product C and 17% in the other products, and we've done 42, we've done 23%, and you are trying to search that where is 26, where is 30, where is 22. It's kind of difficult. It's a burden on your mental process. So core advice is that you utilize visual cues so that it will be easy for the audience to compare magnitudes in figure. So let's see how a heat map should look like. So this is how a heat map should look like. You can take note of how there is a color contrast. You see how there's a color contrast to show the level of magnitude of figures. So if someone is talking about 58%, it's easy for you to catch it because you can see it already. There's a color saturation level there. So it's very easy for you. If someone is saying the lowest figure is in category 6, you can easily see that it's 11%. You can pick out that it's 11%. So that is what a heat map does. It helps us to compare magnitudes, numbers with much more magnitudes than tables. So line graphs, the next visual style that Cole emphasizes that we can use in effectively telling stories with data is a line graph. So we usually use line graph to plot continuous data. When we talk about continuous data that involves above 10 series or 10 groups of data. So the line graph can either be a single series, 2 series, or multiple series. And the data should always be in consistent interval. It should always be in a consistent interval. So this is an example of a single series line graph. I'm sure this is something that we usually see in our business meetings when you're talking about sales, how sales has dipped, why sales has spiked, and all that. We can also include an additional series. So it can also be 2 series when you're trying to compare other values, and it can also be multiple series also. So another important visual style that Cole highlights is the scatter plot. She emphasized, or she also gave a caveat, that usually scatter plots are usually used for people in the research and scientific field. So members here who are into research, who are doing research in the lab, are much more used to that. Most people in the business sphere or the business area don't usually make use of the scatter plot. But some people usually do, but it's rare. So this is an example of a scatter plot. This is an example of a scatter plot. It's useful in showing the relationship between 2 things, as you can see the clear contrast there. So another important visual style that Cole highlighted that is very useful in telling stories with data is slope graphs. Slope graphs can be useful when you have 2 time periods or points of comparisons, and you want to quickly show relative increase or decreases or differences across various categories between 2 data points. So the slope graphs usually pack a lot of information in addition to absolute values. And the lines that connect them give you a visual increase or decrease. So this is an example of a slope graph. You see that it shows difference between 2 categories or 2 different data points. So this is not something we usually may not see very often in business fair, but Cole emphasizes that it's very, very important when you are trying to do a comparison or analysis across various categories. It's also useful when you use a survey data, when you're trying to get results from survey data. And another important visual style that Cole highlights is the vertical bars. They are very, very common. This is the most common visual style that we see in our business environment, because it's very, very easy to interpret. Very easy to interpret. But Cole also gives a warning. She states that when using a vertical bar, always start from a baseline of 0. Because sometimes we go to some cycle meetings and we see that a bar doesn't start from 0, the baseline. It may start from half. Maybe it's starting from 20 or from 50. So Cole states that when a vertical bar does not start from the baseline, that's 0, or starts from maybe midway or halfway, it gives a false sense of data. So you may not analyze the data the way it is. So she states that always start your vertical bars from the baseline of 0. So it can also be in a single, just like the line can be in single, 2, or multiple series, just to compare. We should make sure that we think about our content, like remember, what do you want your audience to know? What part of your data do you want audience to get across? Then she talked about the stacked bars. So this are the stacked bars. This is also one of the common visuals we use in our business environment. It's used to compare totals across categories. Used in analyzing subcomponents. It can sometimes be difficult to compare values, but you highlight, if you think about your context, you highlight part of the stacked bars, it will be easy to understand. Like you can see in the first part, the first bar below is easy to understand because it's close to the baseline. It's close to the baseline. When it's not close to the baseline, it's quite difficult to interpret it. But if you make the data stand out, it can be easy to understand. Then she also talked about waterfall. When I saw this, I must confess that I don't think I've ever seen this kind of visual data before. I don't think I have. But she also says it's a very, very useful, very, very effective visual style. I must confess, I don't even know how to even plot it. I don't even think it's on Excel, but I'm sure there are some Excel gurus that know how to plot.
Yeah, I've seen it in financial analysis before.
Oh, okay, okay. I'm sure all those advanced cycle meetings, you will see them there. So this is how a waterfall looks like. And there are two pieces of bar charts. So it's kind of similar to a stacked bar chart, but it's like a disintegrated stacked bar chart. So it's easy to compare changes from the starting point to the end point. So if you look at that graph, it talks about an analysis of head count starting from 2014 to the end of 2014. So in between, we see additions and deductions, what has happened. So it's very, very easy to show, it's used to showing changes from the starting point to the resulting end point. And she also mentioned horizontal bar charts. This is also very, very common in the business fair. And while reading this book, I noticed that this is her favorite visual style, because when she's talking about some visual styles that are not easy to understand, that are very, very difficult or complex, the solution she provides is always usually using a horizontal bar chart. This is because it's extremely easy to interpret, very easy to interpret, especially when you are comparing categories. That's why we know it's very, very common in business, in financial management and in financial analysis, or in sales analysis, because it's very easy to understand. And they can also occur in single, two, or multiple series. So we also have, just as we have a stacked vertical bar, we also have the stacked horizontal bar. So they're kind of similar. And if you notice, if you look at this carefully, they are very, 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 very useful in analyzing survey data. As you can see in the chart there, it helps to show the total across different categories and gives a sense of the subcomponent pieces. So you can analyze the subcomponents within the stack horizontal bars, and they can be structured to show either absolute values or the sum to 100%. So this is another visual style I will confess that I've not seen before, but Cole also emphasizes that it's very, very useful in telling data, in telling stories with data. They are quite difficult to understand, but they are also useful in visualizing numbers of very, very large or vast magnitude. So this is how an area mapping looks like, or an area graph looks like. So it's like she rightly said, it's very, very useful in interpreting numbers of broad magnitude. So while she highlighted those those 12 important visual styles that are very, very effective in telling stories with data, she highlighted some visual styles that we should avoid. And I'm sure if you've not read this book, please don't be surprised when she mentions this, because this is one of the most common visual styles that we always use in analysis. And if you read the book, you could feel Cole's hatred and animosity for this visual style, that she had to call it evil, and she called it pie charts. He said pie charts are evil and should never ever be used in visuals. Why did she say so? She stated that pie charts give a full sense of analysis because the human visual capacity cannot interpret angles to data analysis. So it always gives a false sense of analysis. And that's why she mentioned that you should never ever use, if you're a professional, a business professional, you should, unless you have a very, very strong reason for it, unless you have a very strong reason for it, you should avoid using pie charts. Pie charts, you mentioned it, pie charts are evil. Avoid using pie charts. So she said from across all her experience, she has always known pie charts to always give a false sense of analysis. So you should avoid them as much as possible. And she also stated that we should avoid 3D visuals. 3D visuals also give a false sense of analyzing data because of the dimensional, we like call it the dimensional flow it gives to analyzing data. So she emphasized that it's better you use a two-dimensional visual style that will be easy to interpret and give the right sense of data analysis than using a 3D visual style to try to avoid using 3D visuals. And she, just like pie charts, she also stated that you should avoid do not charts. I don't know if I've seen donut charts before, but it's kind of similar to pie chart, but it just looks like a donut. It has an extra hole in it. So just like pie charts also, because of the angles, humans don't know how to compare angles to data analysis. So she said it's better you stay off using donut charts. And she also talked about secondary y-axis, that's having an additional y-axis on the graph, that it's really, really very unnecessary, except you have a very valid reason for it. And if you have a valid reason for it, try and minimize it as much as possible so as to be able to send your message across. So the third lesson that Cole tried to teach us in helping us tell stories with data effectively is to eliminate clutter. I know we've heard about clutter, especially when you walk into your room, maybe early Saturday morning, and you see all your dress, everything scattered everywhere, and it's like giving you a headache. If you are the kind of tidy and neat person, when you see something scattered, you hate seeing so many things hanging around. You see, maybe you walk into a kitchen, I see plates everywhere. It's kind of annoying and very displeasing to the eye. So just the way it's displeasing to the eye when you see things like that, it's also displeasing to the eye when there are so many elements in the presentation or in a graphical analysis. So Cole emphasizes that we should try as much as possible to eliminate clutter from our presentation. We want to take a discerning look at visual elements that we allow into our publications. We should identify anything that isn't adding any informative value or isn't adding any value to make up its presence. And we should remove those things. When we identify those things and see that it's not adding any value, we remove it. Why? Because too much elements, too much visual elements causes cognitive load. And what is cognitive load? Cognitive load simply means the effort you use to process data. You are sitting in a presentation or a business meeting and you see a slide and you see so many graphs, so many colors, and it's you don't even know where to start from. You don't even know where to start interpreting the data. And it gives you, it strains your mental processing power. So because that's why Cole also emphasizes that the importance of eliminating clutter is to reduce cognitive load, and that effective data storytellers need to think about reducing cognitive load anytime they are preparing a data or making a presentation. Very, very important, because when there's too much cognitive load on the audience, it's very, very easy to tune off, because the human mental processing power is kind of finite, is limited. There's a degree to what the human brain can process at a glance. So it's important that we remove visual elements that causes so much cognitive load. So we'll see an example of how we can remove visual elements that causes cognitive load or burdens our mental processing power. So like I said, we earlier stated that clutter can lead to excessive cognitive load or strain your mental processing power. And this happens when you have visual elements that don't add anything to your graph or to your presentation. So we should try as much as possible to remove those visual elements from our presentation because they make it complex and very hard to understand. So because of this, she highlighted a principle. She called it Gestalt principle of visual perception. Gestalt visual principle of visual perception. She stated that when it comes to identifying which elements in our visuals that are important to the audience, we need to consider the Gestalt principles of visual perception. So Gestalt principle of visual perception was brought about by the Gestalt School of Psychology in the 1900s. And their main objective was to understand how individuals perceive order in the world around them. And what they came away with are the principles of what we call visual perception. And even though it was those principles were founded in the 1900s, they are still very, very applicable today. So there are 6 principles of the Gestalt principles of visual perception. They are proximity, similarity, enclosure, closure, continuity, and connection. So we'll look at these principles one by one to see how they can aid us in moving clutter from our presentation. So the first principle is proximity. The first principle states humans tend to think of objects that are physically close together as belonging to a part of a group. So if you look at this image, simply by virtue of just differentiating the spacing between the dots, your eyes are drawn either down the columns in the first case or across the rows in the second case. So you see that those proximity, you see that those dots are in a group. So you tend to look at those dots as a group because they have close proximity. They have close proximity to each other. So humans tend to think of objects that are physically close together as belonging to part of a group. So we see that in that figure there, that by virtue of differentiating the spacing between the dots, your eyes are drawn close to either a column or a row, just by virtue of the spacing, just the spacing between it. All those dots are at the same point, but just by virtue of their proximity within themselves, your brain interprets it as either being a row or a column. So that's the first principle of Gestalt. Yes, let me share my screen again. Sorry, I think it was network. Okay, so I was talking about the second principle, that's similarity. So this principle states that, so I don't know if you can see my slides.
Yes, we can.
All right, so the second principle of Gestalt visual perception says that objects that are of similar color, size, orientation are perceived as related to a part group. So if you look at that, we can see that if you look at the figure 3, we see the similarity of the color is a cue for our eyes to read across the rows. So just because those dots are similar. They are all blue. You see that those dots as a row, or we can see it as a, depending on how it looks like. So that's what the principle states, that objects that are similar in color, shape, or orientation are perceived as related as part of a group. Then the third one is enclosure. People think of objects that are physically enclosed together as belonging to a part of a group. So if we see, like we can see in that, we can see in that picture there, those dots that are already highlighted or enclosed in the box are seen as part of a group. So if we are having a presentation or a graph and we enclose a part of the graph, we see it as a group. We can leverage the enclosure principle and draw a visual distinction within our data, as done in that graph that we can see there. Then the closure principle. People like things to be simple and fit in the constructs that they are already in their head. I think this is one of the most important principles of the Gestalt visual perception. People like things that are simple and easy to do, because it doesn't put any mental strain or adds burden on their mental processing power. So we can see what that Gestalt principle of closure states. Just because we see those dots in a circular manner, we already interpret it as being a circle. So we like, our brain already constructs it already to make it look like as if it's already a circle. And the concept says that people like things to be simple and to fit in the constructs that are already in their head. People tend to perceive a single recognizable shape when they can. As you can see here, the graph is shaping. So even if there's no border around the graph, we still see the graph and we still see how the graph progresses, because we have that construct in our head already to show that it's already a graph. Then the next principle is continuity. It's kind of similar to closure, but the principle states that the eyes seek the smoothest parts and naturally create continuity in what we see, even where it may not explicitly exist. So if we look at the objects, in number one and pull them apart, what most people or what most individuals want to see is that box. When you pull it apart, it's not actually that, but you see that there's a missing link there. So the principle simply states that the eye seek the smoothest parts, and we all naturally create a continuity, a process for it already. So if we look at that graph, the application of this principle, we see it in bars. Even though there's no y-axis, we've already taken that continuity already to interpret it that there's a y-axis already in that place. So that's what simply the principle of continuity means. Then connection. We tend to think of objects that are physically connected as part of a group. So regardless whether they're of the same color or whether they are of the same shape or different shape, as long as there's a connection between them, as humans, we tend to see it as being connected or being together as part of a group. And we can see the application when we talk about a line graph. When we see the markers connected by a line, we take it as connected as part of a group. But if there is no connection, we just see it as scattered dots. So that's what that principle brings to the fore, that humans tend to think of objects that are physically connected as a part of a group. So these 6 principles help us to make our visual styles, make our data. We need to apply these principles in order to ensure that our audience are taking in our communication in the right way, and we're not communicating what we ought not to communicate. I don't know if at this point, if anybody has something to contribute, maybe someone that has read the book that has something else to contribute.
So, hello, my name is Shakira. Sorry, I'm supposed to be the moderator, but for some reason, I thought it was 7 a.m. UK time, 7 p.m. Okay. I'm so sorry. I apologize to everyone, but I was planning for UK time. Trust me, I didn't know it was meant to be 6 p.m. Nigerian time. So I do apologize once again. So nice to meet you, Mr. Oluwadare, and everybody in the house.
Nice
so
to
my
meet
name
you.
is Shakira again. And so before you go, you continue. I think I joined in the middle. I read a bit of the book. To be honest, I didn't finish it because for some reason I'm familiar with a lot of things she was talking about. And you know, you mentioned the pie chart bit, and you did say that she said that it's not that because of the way the pie chart is. But you know that pie chart can still be used for certain data, especially when it's in percentages. So it may not be generally, you may not be able to use it generally, but when you're talking about percentage, I think you can still use it effectively. But I'd like to have your take on that.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for that. I agree with you completely, because when I was reading the book, and like I said earlier, when she stated that her animosity for pie chart, and I was like, there are times that pie chart, I actually get the sense of analysis from pie chart. But she category, I don't know whether she had a bad experience. She had bad experiences with pie chart, but she categorically stated that if you want to effectively tell a story, that you should never ever use a pie chart. She even mentioned that if you use a 3D pie chart, that's even worse. She gave an example of a 3D pie chart that says it's 31%, and when you do the actual calculation, it's not even up to 31%, and the audience is saying that it's 31%. You get so.
Hello, Dari.
Yes.
Okay, so just to add a bit of what I understand from what she was trying to explain for pie charts. While we can still use pie charts to show some descriptions, especially when it has to do with percentages and partitioning. For instance, you want to show maybe channel contribution or maybe economic contribution per category, right? So we can still show maybe in pie charts percentage contribution. However, what she might also be saying extensively when you look at her context is, you know, sometimes pie charts fail to explain what will I put it in terms of reason. It also fails to show insights, right? It's just a plain description of partitioning across what you are trying to explain. So I think for her, she's detailed. She's somebody that is driven by extensive and extensive analysis in terms of data description. So that is why you might see that apathy, right? For a surface data analysis, you can present pie chart and to show percentages across what you want to show your audience. But when you want to go down into more descriptive analysis in terms of insights, assertions, and why certain things led to other things, it will not give you that description. So I think that's why. Okay. Thank you.
Sorry, Victor, let me jump in again. So that is why you need to know your audience. So for you to do any proper analysis, you need to know your audience. You need to know at what level the integrity. Like, okay, do you want it just on the surface, or you want to have a proper insight? So for you to have a proper insight, then you might have an in-depth graphs or chart and all that. Because when you are even building your dashboard, so you need to take all these things into consideration when you're building your dashboard. So that is why, in my own opinion, sometimes with pie charts, for instance, when we are taking demographics and you're saying, oh, we want to just see maybe male, females, what's the percentage and all that. And even with no graphs and charts, well, even after, you know, doing your graphs or charts, you still need to kind of, I don't know, when I did, in my small time of doing data analysis, I still needed to explain it a bit, because most of the people you are talking are so you need to explain it in a non-technical terms, such that they would understand, even with just the numbers and the data. You understand what I'm trying to say, Dari and Victor, right? And every other person. You get what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
I have a thought to share.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I go ahead?
Yes, Peter, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I was going to say, if data is looked at in isolation, it's easier to misconstrue what you're trying to present. If you combine, let's say, a pie chart with another visualization technique that allows us to say, okay, this is what we're trying to interpret here, it won't be as bad as it sounds when we say it's a no-no. So the key word here is context and then the connection we're trying to portray. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you. So very valid contributions from everyone. But if you also look at her perspective, I think she also had she had a point though, even though she mentioned that if you have a valid reason for using pie charts, you should. But she gave her reasons for not for calling pie chart evil, because the human brain cannot ascribe data analysis to angles, and that pie charts usually gives a false sense of data. That's why she spent like a page to analyze how a 3D pie chart gives a completely wrong sense or false sense of data analysis. But she also states that if you feel that you can effectively use pie charts, you should. But from her own advice, that she would advise you to stay away from pie charts by all means, So like Shakira rightly said, that if you feel it's effective and your audience, you think about the context and your audience is actually getting the message you're trying to pass across, please feel free to use pie charts. I don't know if anyone else has something else to contribute before we proceed. Maybe personal experience with using other visual styles.
For me, I kind of use again, it still goes back to the data on what you're trying to show. Because sometimes when you're trying to compare year 1, year 2, year 3, there's some type of charts or graphs that is appropriate for that. So, and maybe sometimes it's line graph that you need to use when you're doing comparison analysis. Exactly. So it really does depend on what you're analyzing at the time and for what purpose you're analyzing it. Then the only thing I kind of liked again, because I didn't know about the waterfall. I've never, when I hear waterfall, I just think about agile, business and agile environment. So when you say waterfall, I'm like, what's waterfall? So I've never really used it. So you talked about a couple of the charts, because I was busy taking notes. I'm like, oh my goodness, I thought I know so much, but I think I'm still learning.
Yes, same thing too. There are so many visual styles. I was like, are you sure these things are on Excel?
They're all there.
I'm using a different.
They're all there.
So it just shows. So it just shows that there are so many ways we can actually tell stories with data and utilize them.
But sorry, before you go ahead,
yes.
But even when you are telling a story, you still need to, how do I put it? When you talked about I just wanted to talk about the clutter bit as well. Because usually when you try to extract your data from maybe your SQL or wherever you're exporting your data, where you're exporting your data from, and you export it to Excel and you're trying to aggregate the data and all. So when you're doing all this, you you still need to understand, who your audience is and what you are trying to derive from, because that is what will translate into your graphs and charts, and that is where you have the clutter. Because the information that is not required is there, so you only need to extract the necessary information.
Exactly.
To get your graphs and charts, and that is why sometimes the graphs or charts can be quite confusing based on that.
So,
just my
very I understand. Very valid, very valid contribution. So like you rightly said, and she also pointed out that context is very important, because you also need to know about your audience, who your audience are, and what they actually want from that presentation. If you feel like a particular visual style would tell that story, please feel free to utilize and use that story, because at the long run, it's the main objective is for your audience to get the information. I don't know if someone else wants to contribute. Okay. All right. So let's move on to the lack of visual order. So she highlights that clear contrast can be a signal to our audience and helping them understand where to focus their attention. So if our presentation doesn't have the right, sorry, I don't know if you can mute your mic, please. All right, thank you. So if your presentation doesn't have the right order, it can increase the cognitive load of your audience. And she also highlighted 3 factors that you should look out when you want to improve your design aesthetics. She talked about alignment. Alignment is very important. There's alignment of the words within your graph. And she also talked about utilization of white space. She mentioned so much about white space. And I think most of us are guilty of white space. I know I am guilty of white space too, because you see a space on your PowerPoint and you're like, that place is too, put something there, put something there.
Or even pick a graphics on Google.
So
something fanciful.
Exactly. Maybe just put like an infographic or something. Don't let that place be blank. That kind of thing. And she states that it's just putting something there increases mental loads because it causes distraction and may make it difficult for the person to even understand your data. So she also mentions utilizing white space. She says that you should make sure that there is nothing at both margins. Leave both margins bare, that's the left and right margins, so as to improve your design aesthetics of your presentation. And she also talked about the using contrast in the right way. So this is an example that she gave about lack of visual order. If you look at this, I want participants to give comments. How do you see this graph, this data, this visual style? Is it beautiful to look at? Is it to look at? I don't know if anybody has.
It seems like a lot is going.
It's like a jamboree happening.
Is going on. Yeah, there's something everywhere.
Exactly. So you see, there's the justification of the words are out of place, diagonal lines. So it's easy to even place anything, to even pick out something and read. So much. So she gave. She
we also want to note that pardon me for this, just to allow the moderator. If there are comments in response to your question, and of course, there's also a possibility that someone is raising their hands.
All right, thank you. So if you look at the second graph, you see it's a sharp contrast between the first one. You see how there's actively utilization of the right alignment, white space, and the use of contrast. She also stated that humans, especially the people from the Western part of the world, we tend to read in a Z direction or in a Z-shaped pattern. As we read in a Z-shaped form from the upper left-hand corner down to the right corner. So it's always important, if you are to justify your fonts, always justify your fonts from the left-hand side, because when someone looks at the presentation, the first thing is that they try to read from the left-hand side. So it's important to align your fonts, align your words by choosing a left justification, as you can see in the graph below. So the words that she used are perfectly justified using the left justification, and she utilized contrast. So in terms of the context you have, the communication you are trying to pass across, effectively use contrast so as to know, to focus the attention on what your audience wants to look at. So utilize these three areas to improve your design aesthetics. Use the right alignment, white space, and use of contrast.
Sorry, Terry. We have less than 15 minutes. So
okay. All right. Sorry. I know there's a lot to cover. I'll try and be as concise as possible. So another example she used about contrast was this graph that talked about weighted performance index, and that this graph was trying to highlight how a particular business, that's our business, was doing relative to a competitor. And if you look at that, the graph, you see that it's very difficult to understand. It's very difficult to do a comparative analysis between your business and what the competitors are, because the lines are scattered. You can't see anything. You can't make any, you can't pick up any analysis from this. So she now gave an instance of how to do a proper use of contrast. Like I said earlier, Cole loves horizontal bar charts. Her solution for anything is always horizontal bar charts, and this was the solution she gave for a weighted performance index. Simple horizontal bar charts using contrast effectively, and you could see that it's very, very easy to make an analysis between our business and other competitors, depending on the context. So I'll take you through the steps. She also gave highlighted steps to declutter a graph. She gave 6 steps. And this is the graph we are trying to declutter. When I saw this graph, it just took me back to my Q4 business review. And this graph was all over my presentation. I'm like, wow. So I've been increasing mental stress on people's brain all this while. So this was 6. He gave 6 important steps on how to declutter, and we'll be looking at it step by step. So the first step was to remove the chart border. She says chart borders are usually unnecessary, very unnecessary. And we've covered that in our Digestive principle of closure. So she also stated that instead we should think about using white space. Use the white space, take out the white border, utilize the white space, and differentiate the visual from other elements as the page is needed. So you can see that we've taken out the border here. So we've taken out the border and you've utilized the white space. The second step is to remove grid lines. I hate grid lines. It gives me a headache, honestly. I just hate seeing those lines, and I agree with her. It makes the graph look neater, and it utilizes white space. And she also says you should remove data marks. If you should only leave data marks when you are trying to make a particular point in a month. Maybe in a month you're trying to make a particular point, what happened there. But if you are not trying to make a point, remove data marks, because it increases mental load and cognitive load. And she also says clean the axis labels. That is, remove all the decimal points, extra decimals. They are very unnecessary, very, very unnecessary, and they increase cognitive load. So clean it up and make it as neat as possible. The x-axis, if you're talking about time periods, please abbreviate the months and make it look very neat. You clean it up. Then the fifth thing is try and label directly. You can remove the legends. The legends are they're extra visual elements. So you can incorporate it into the axis. And the sixth one is to leverage a consistent color. That's leveraging the gesture principle of proximity. So when we leverage the legend, it's easy to interpret and to know which is which. So we see that it's we see that this slide is bereft of extra visual elements that increase cognitively. And it's very simple to understand, very simple to understand. So we can utilize those six steps when we're trying to declutter a graph. So
sorry, can I quickly ask a question? You know, yes, I agree to removing some of the things, but with the grid lines, I think sometimes because of the margin, the numbers, it helps you understand that, oh, it's easily understandable when the numbers are there. You can easily compare that, oh, this, do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes, so, yes, it's easy to trace it,
Exactly.
Yes, yes. So she mentioned that if you have a reason, because for every step she was giving, she said if you have a reason and if you feel that your audience will benefit from it, you can leave the grid lines. But generally, she said grid lines are very unnecessary and usually cause increased mental load. Like you rightly stated that sometimes people try to use that grid line to trace to the particular area. But that's where also data markers can help. Data markers also show that point and reveal the particular figure at that point. Yeah. So, but if you still feel grid lines are okay, you can utilize them. So the fourth lesson was try and draw attention where you want it. So in this chapter, Cole tried to examine how people see and how you can take advantage of the visuals, take advantage of crafting visuals from the way people see. She talked about sight, she talked about memory, she highlighted the use of important, powerful tools like pre-attentive attributes. She talked examples of those pre-attentive attributes are size, color, position. You can utilize those in your presentation. So she talked about types of memory, iconic memory, short-term memory, long-term memory, and how this relates to pre-attentive attributes. These pre-attentive attributes enable our audience to see what they want them to see before they even know that they are seeing it. It can help to create what she called a visual hierarchy in your presentation. They see the first thing and make their analysis before seeing any other thing. So example of pre-attentive attributes might be orientation, shape, color, width, size. There are several. So you can always utilize it in your presentation. So an example of a pre-attentive attribute in a text. This is a text that has no pre-attentive attributes. If you look at this text, it's just bland. There's nothing draws you to a particular word, a particular statement or a phrase. There's nothing you can see. But if you utilize the pre-attentive attribute of a color, you can see that it causes a visual hierarchy. When you look at this, the first thing that your mind takes you is these products are clearly the best in the class. From it, you can deduce what the paragraph is saying. So she emphasizes that we should make use of pre-attentive attributes. This is another example of a pre-attentive attribute utilizing color, trying to highlight 7 important concerns, top 10 design concerns. So these are the first 7 that your audience will see if that's what they want to see. Then the fifth lesson was to think like a designer. In this chapter, Cole talked about traditional design concepts because to be an effective storyteller in terms of data, you should also think like a designer. A designer tries to thinks about the audience and does everything in terms of aesthetics, affordances, accessibility to ensure that the audience gets what they want. So she highlighted four important factors or attributes that can make an individual think like a designer. She talks about utilizing visual affordances. So when we visual affordances helps our audience to interact with our visualization. So how we make use of visual affordances is by highlighting important stuff, eliminating distractions, and creating a clear hierarchy of information. And she also says our presentation should be accessible to people of different technical backgrounds. So if I walk into a finance meeting, even though I might not be, I might not have a finance background, my presentation should be, as a non-financial person, I should be able to interpret it simply. I should be able to, okay, this is what this graph is saying. So your visual styles should be accessible to all kinds of people from different technical backgrounds. And how can you do this? You should not be overly complex, and you should use text thoughtfully. Use simple words that drive home your point. And she also says, pay attention to your design. Be smart with color. Don't use colors indiscriminately. Be smart with color. Pay attention to alignment. We talked about alignment. We also talked about white space. Pay attention to white space. Just because there's a blank white space by your margin, please don't put an infographic there or put something there because it's blank. Please utilize white space. Then the fourth part is gain acceptance from your audience. Articulate benefits of a new approach. If there's a new approach you are presenting, articulate the benefits of the new approach from the old one. You can show it side by side. You can provide multiple options, and also seek a member of one of the audience to help support your presentation if you are trying to present a new idea. And the last but not the least is telling a story, telling an effective story. So she says, if you tell an effective story, it captures your audience's attention. And once you capture your audience's attention, 90% of the job is done already. So how do you tell effective stories? She says you should utilize a flow of a beginning, a middle twist, that's the twist, and a call to action. She also says you should utilize the power of repetition. She gave the example of the Little Red Riding Hood. Some of us might know the stories, but some of us, like us, that went to I beg you know grammar school, you might not know, but she said
that's not true. Everybody knows this story.
Okay, but she said that why that story stuck into people's memories is because of the power of repetition. The people were always talking about it every time, so we should try and utilize power of the repetition. Yeah, she also shared tactics like horizontal, vertical logic, and storyboarding. These are tactics that helps to keep our story fresh in our minds and in our perspective, and helps us to be able to communicate clearly to our audience. So in summary, we've outlined 6 lessons that Cole helped us to be effective storytellers. His first lesson is to understand the context. Understand the context. Why am I doing this? Why am I presenting this data? What does my audience want? What do they want to get from this data? Have a clear understanding of who you are, communicating to, what you need them to do, and how you communicate to them. And choose an appropriate visual display. We've gone through 12 visual displays as highlighted by Cole, so you can select which one that fits you and can help you pass across your message. Then eliminate clutter. Please remove any elements that don't have any informative value. It causes a cognitive load to your audience. It increases mental stress. Please remove any unnecessary visual elements. Then focus attention where you want it. Employ the power of pre-attentive attributes. We highlighted them: color, size, position. And utilize them in your presentation. And think like a designer. A designer thinks about the consumer, wants the consumer to have the best of whether the product or the painting. So think like a designer. Utilize affordances, accessibility, and gain acceptance from your audience. And last but not the least, tell a beautiful, effective story. If you don't tell a good story, you might not get what your audience wants. So tell a story, craft a clear story, utilize repetition, and employ tactics like vertical, horizontal, and reverse storyboard. So that is the summary of what Cole gave to us to help us to be effective storytellers using data. So I'd like to leave this brief quote. It's from Plutarch. Plutarch is a Greek historian. And he says, the mind is not a vessel to be filled, but a fire to be kindled. So I hope this book by Cole will help us kindle our mind to be more effective storytellers using data. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dari.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much.
Dari.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Over to you, my baby.
Thank you.
You're on mute.
Oh, so sorry about that. Sometimes you think you have pressed the button, but you haven't. So this is is an eye opener, and it was quite enlightening for you to have, gone through all this just to, explain it to us in layman terms for us to understand. We really do appreciate it. So from what I gathered, I don't know if we have time for me to do small recap, or you've done it already, you've done the summary. I don't know if anybody still wants us to do a bit of a recap, or we should just carry on and close. What
there are questions or anything you want to share with us? Or but you typed something earlier. Something happened to you with visuals, with presentation. Does anyone have anything from their past they want to share that they wish they had done better, or what will they be doing better going forward? Okay, Dominique, I see your hand up. Please go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Darius, so much for nailing it. I think it's a very wonderful book. Like, I read it and my head was like, oh God, what have I been doing? And okay, also things that I was doing that I think I didn't know I was doing well, that I need to continue. So I think the book just opens your mind to what are the things you need to stop, what are the things you need to continue, and what are the things you need to improve on. So one of the things that I also so apart from thinking about graphs and all of that, one other area the book took my mind to was sending emails. So most times we know that when you send an email with an attachment, you could, like data says, maybe just 40% would open the attachment. So what I usually do then is just put like a summary on the email, and sometimes I put my graph on the email. So this book tells me better how to position those graphs on the email so that people will want to go into the attachment to understand better. If you see the example that he gave then when he was talking about the 90-70 and the 21% and all of that. So when you write things like that on your email, you should try, when there's a number you're trying to talk about, you should try to amplify it so that people understand. So it's just to help us put our minds in perspective that it's not just about maybe PowerPoint presentations or making graphs. It's also how we tell story. How can you take this knowledge into sending an email? How would you send an email and someone looks at it and he's able to get all the information? We're not all the same. Not everybody will want to read the long email. Not everybody will want to say, oh, this email is just too short. But how can you get someone's attention? That's what Cole was talking about, I think, throughout the book. How can you get somebody's attention? When she was saying remove the lines, because the grid lines might just be too much, and before the person gets to the detail, you might even be moving past that slide, and the person has not picked the information on that particular slide. But if you reduce the grid lines, you remove the necessary headers or the keys, and you just put focus, and the person's eyes only has to focus on the things that are important. You will capture it before you will move on to the next slide. I think these are the things that I learned from the book, and things that I think I need to also improve on. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Dari. It was awesome.
Thank you.
Okay, so for me, thank you, Dare. Excellent delivery. I also noticed that you imbibed some of the things that you read in the book in your own presentation. There was no clutter. There was a lot of good use of white space. So is it that you're very good at this before, or you already started putting this into whatever you read in the book into practice? So
Yes, I
for
was.
me, so for me, immediately I started reading, I started cringing at my mistakes. Everything has to be bold. The border lines have to be thick. I'm even the evil pie charts are fallen into the trap of the evil pie chart. But as I read the book, and this is such a technical subject, right? Like you said in the beginning of the webinar, this is such a technical subject, but she was able to explain data in very, very simple terms. Someone else could have written this book and it would have been complete. It could have been a complete headache to read, but you almost feel like you're reading a storybook or a novel. And that's the whole point. Simplicity, clarity, get the message across. So for me, is to keep it as a Bible, because I had a lot of red flags until I master it and become better. So thank you so much. It was a good book. I enjoyed reading it, and I even enjoyed it better now that you have reviewed it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Ogo. That's the name. Someone is asking now they can get the soft copy. I don't know if Ato is in the group. Does that mean he doesn't have a copy? Yeah.
Ato, are you on the group? Are you on the group? No. Okay. Someone, Daniel, I'm sure you're in. You could just please put your number on the chat section, and then someone will share the. But then first, it's not compulsory. It's only if you're interested in this part of the club. We have already shared our intention and what our purpose is. So only if you're interested. All right. I see that you're interested. Your number is already up. And if there anyone also in the meeting tonight who would also like to be part of the group, please feel free. Otherwise, drop your email address and then and there's a hand being raised up. Someone's hand is up and we can see from here the picture.
There's Akinyera Ramide. I don't know if that's the mistake or the person is trying to. I don't know.
All right. What do you want to do now, Shakira? Let's just share the talk, or maybe let us just call it a wrap-up talk about the book. So big well done, and thank you to Darren for leading us on this part tonight. As the moderator, too, well done. I'm hoping to hear from a number of people tonight, but I've not heard from them. I'm hoping. What happened? Did you get through the book? I want two persons to say, did you get through the entire book, or what happened? Or you're somewhere midway, and then what would you do after today? Just two persons. Might just say.
So I would like to ask, do we have an access to the PowerPoint presentation? Can will it be made available for everyone? The presentation.
So I'll leave that to the lead conversation is for today. He actually prepared it by himself. So he will decide what he wants to do with it.
I'll ask my lawyer.
So I think all right. Okay. All right. So summing up all the conversations. Somebody speaking, one or two persons. Thanks for jumping in and telling us what to do differently from now. Okay. So I'm sure the group would start closing with your thoughts and what to think about this session. Well, so just to sum up conversation, guidelines have been shared by Gary. The book is a lot explicit, and just like August also said, it's not a book that you read and then you drop. It's something that you take on here. What's also important is before you present at any point in time. So I'm just going to say this one sentence. Before you present at any point in time, you may want to share your work to a friend or a colleague. See if they grasp the story you're trying to tell. I hope everyone can hear me. Can everybody hear me? Hello?
Slightly
Yes, we can.
Everybody
Yes.
hear me? Oh, great.
Yes, we can.
So, yes, we can. What did I just say, please? Let me be sure where I stopped. Share your work to a friend. Did everybody get that? You want to access the trusted colleague. It's just this presentation. See if they get the same story you're trying to present. I think with this you'll do excellent in any boardroom or meeting. And that's just my own tips for the evening. Otherwise, we're done for the evening, and thanks to everybody. Do have a really great rest of the weekend. Let's get back to the group. If there are questions, if there are thoughts, if there are disputes, like I said, I titled the group. If you have issues, comments, questions, disputes. If you don't agree with her, the author on income, so please feel free to drop it on the group. And do have a great evening. Talk to you soon. The next book will be shared also in the group so that we can already start to read. Enjoy a great evening and bye-bye.
You too.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Shakira. Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Bye,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone. Thank you very much.
All right, bye. Thank you.
Good night.
Bye, everyone. Thank you, Dari, for the session.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.